Joining me now is Lisa Thompson. Lisa, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
Glad to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
You serve as the liaison for the Abolition of Sex Trafficking for the Salvation Army. And you're widely respected for your efforts to organize partnerships among, I think, about 30 different faith-based organizations to take on this issue. Tell us what your #1 priority is in terms of addressing this sex trafficking.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the issue of partnerships. That is very important. There's a lot of partnerships developing around the country to community task forces that are springing up in all over the country, bringing together multidisciplinary groups as well as everyone from law enforcement to health and human service providers to work together. And so one of those examples of those partnerships is one that the Salvation Army has been leading in Chicago called Promise. And it has over 31 partners, or actually at least 31 partners in Chicago, all working together, joining their resources to combat the problem of trafficking and exploitation of children in the Chicago area. So the Salvation Army, the Cook County Sheriff's Office, the Chicago Alliance Against Sexual Exploitation, there's many groups working together, and in that way, through the unity, we can make more progress. This is an issue that's too big for any one of us.
Now, you're working primarily on the side from the standpoint of policy, or are you also working with helping these young girls, get them connected with those who can help them come out of this?
I think the Salvation Army has a pretty holistic approach. We do work to some extent on policy issues, although I'd say that's a smaller percentage of the total that we do. But a lot of our effort is aimed at services to at the grassroots level, to actual victims, to outreach in the community, to advocacy and awareness and education efforts. And just like I thought I would share with people, there's a lovely faith-based coalition called the Faith Alliance Against Slavery and Trafficking, which has several different faith-based relief and development organizations and groups focused on trafficking who've come together and created a curriculum to train people on how to work with trafficking survivors. So that's one thing that we've had the privilege of being a part of, and just shows how we can really, accomplish a lot more by working together.
Well, that really sets the stage for one of the questions that was sent in. It says, I'm involved with a team of people who have been seeking help and restoration for a girl, excuse me, she's actually over 21 now, but the scarring that has taken place in her life emotionally, they said that the task has been extremely difficult for any of us. Because of her age, she does not qualify for help as a minor would. For those that are in that category, are there ministries available to help even adults that have been been trafficked as a child?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think there's a real disconnect for people to understand that children who are trafficked into prostitution grow up to be adult women in prostitution. Yeah. And so many of our services that have developed have focused on providing care and services to the minors, which that's very good and well needed. We need to do that. But for those that we miss, they will continue in that trajectory of continuing in prostitution. They don't just wake up when they're 18 and say, oh, I'm emancipated today. I'm going to go leave my pimp and go get my GED and go get a degree. That doesn't happen. So I think we really need to wake up as a society and stop drawing this arbitrary line where we can just kind of conveniently wash our hands and say, oh, we don't have to worry about her because she chose prostitution, and that's sort of the idea.
I guess when they do cross that line, there's less protection for them, because at 18 they're considered to have been able to make a decision to do that. Yeah,
it's a very unfortunate belief that's out there, but there are organizations that work with adults, women, helping them exit prostitution, and many of those women, I want to be clear, are trafficked. Particularly if they're pimp-controlled women. Pimps are sex traffickers. They recruit, they harbor, transport, provision, obtain women by force, fraud, and coercion for purposes of commercial sexual exploitation. That's the definition of a sex trafficker. It's also the definition of a pimp. So PIM-controlled women are trafficked. And any woman in prostitution, trafficked or not, is going to be harmed by her involvement in the sex trade. So groups do need to look at what they can do to provide services for adult women. And there are some out there, Veronica's Voice, Breaking Free, SAGE. We need more, but they do exist.
I mean, as a culture, we're dealing with a lot of different issues, a lot going on in our nation. How significant of a problem is this, and how much should we focus on addressing this? I mean, let's put this in perspective. I think when you look at the most vulnerable among us, this could be a huge problem.
Well, I guess I would only echo what Pat Truman said a few moments ago. I think we're standing on a precipice, and we're looking at a sheer drop. That there's just this abyss that exists, that our culture is about to plummet over, because we've accepted pornography, we've accepted the sexual objectification of women, and this is conditioning girls to look at themselves as sex objects and to think the sex industry doesn't pose any threat or harm to them. And as Pat said, it's grooming boys to be future sex buyers. And just the degrading and dehumanizing nature of the pornography today is having a really monstrous effect on the psyche, on the emotional development of young men, as can be seen in a case that's just come up at the University of Southern California, USC. Horrible case involving a frat guy who has written one of the most despicable emails imaginable, talking about women as targets. It defies description to even go into here.
Mm. When you look at young girls today, do you see the risk increasing? I mean, as Pat was talking about the expansion of, I mean, is this something that every parent should be concerned about?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to be a fearmonger, but I think you can't live in the culture in which, with this hypersexualized, sex-saturated culture, this toxic sexual soup that's surrounding us, and not expect it to have a catastrophic effect on potentially any young boy or girl. When you're being trained to think that all your self-worth is hinging upon how sexy you are, that's going to have a devastating impact. And actually, the American Psychological Association agrees. They issued a really startling report on the sexualization of girls and the harm that that's having on this generation. I really fear for the children of this generation, because there seems to be this tide, this toxic tide of hypersexualization that's coming at them, and I think we're completely flat-footed in our response and trying to catch up.
Well, one last question I want to ask you, Lisa, on that topic is you work with coalitions primarily within the faith-based community. Is the faith-based community getting it? I mean, do they understand the significance of this?
I think there's a small margin that gets it, but that the mainstream church is still failing to address the issue of pornography in the church and how that leads to issues like commercial sexual exploitation. It's so saddening. I could tell story after story about how churches are just burying issues of pornography use and abuse in their churches, burying it, not acknowledging it, and in the meanwhile, families are getting broken, children are being harmed, they're exposed to the pornography that their fathers may have, men who, unfortunately, some of them are going to go further and start even abusing their own children. So there needs to be more of a concerted effort to address these issues in the church. And there's a great example of a ministry doing that. It's called Grace, which is godly response to sexual abuse in the Christian environment. They're doing amazing work to try to prevent sexual abuse from happening in the church and to help those who've been traumatized regain their spirit, recover from their spiritual injury that happened when they're abused in a church context.
Well, Lisa, thank you for joining us today. And how can people find out more about the work that you're doing on this topic? Well,
I would suggest our Salvation Army anti-trafficking pages on the web, which would be salvationarmyusa.org/trafficking.
All right. Well, we'll put that up on our website as well to direct people there. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Lisa.